Happy Wednesday, everybody. It's good to be back in the podcasting chair. I've got my coffee this morning and my water and my notebook opened up, and I feel primed and ready. It's a strange windy morning in Songdo town. There's an orange glow on the city. It's actually cloudy outside, and it might rain later, so it's daytime, but it doesn't really feel like daytime yet. So there's a strange mood over the city. And Wednesday is just a weird day in general because you don't know where you're at in regards to the weekend. You're in between. Like Wednesday is the dawn or the dusk of the day. You're in this in-between state, and you're not really sure if you still got the Monday blues or the Friday joys. You're just kind of stuck in limbo. That's kind of how I feel today. I woke up at 6 this morning because this is the only time that I have to record this show this week. It's been a busy week. And this morning, in a couple hours, I've got to taxi over to the hospital. I've got a couple of follow-up appointments today. I'm going to meet with the doctor. They're going to look at my knee, swap out the bandages, and then I'm going to do some physical therapy. That takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's really good. It's hard, but it makes me feel like I'm doing something and progressing, and it feels good to just exercise and sweat a little bit. So I have all that happening this morning before I go to work around noon. So it's a busy day today, and I had to get up early to make this podcast happen. But I've got my coffee and now I'm ready to go. You know what's hard to do when you're on crutches? You know what you really can't do is carry stuff. You can stand in place and use your arms, but if you're mobile, you have to use your arms and legs. So the one thing you can't do is carry shit because, for example, if you're going to carry a load of laundry, you're engaging your arms while your legs are moving as well. For some reason, I just pictured the Flintstones, Fred Flintstone running with a pile of rocks in his hand. But what you can't do is carry a full cup of coffee from the kitchen to the office room when you're on crutches. I manage, the way you do it is you do it slowly. So I poured my coffee. When I'm in the kitchen, everything's close. I can sort of stand in the middle of the kitchen and pivot around on one leg and grab stuff. But now the coffee's done. I've got it all made. Now I need a transport. That's where I usually ask for favors, for help. But I was up early, and it was one of those character-defining moments where I had to pull all of my grit together and make it happen against the odds. So the way I figured out to do it, and please tell me if any of you experts know a better way than this, but I just held my coffee in my right hand, and so you got your left hand crutching, and the left hand keeps you steady, and then on the right hand I have my crutch, but it's sort of pinched between my arm and my upper body like a chicken wing hold, because the right hand is trying to balance the coffee cup and not spill all of it. So I take a step forward, left leg, crutching on the left hand, swing the left leg forward. But then when I go to move the right one, I don't have my hands. So with the chicken wing, you kind of throw the right crutch forward to get it in position. And that's dangerous because that swinging movement, that's when you spill. So you got to go nice and slow, baby steps. So I don't know, maybe it took me 2 minutes to to carry my coffee from the kitchen to the study. And one time I did spill, and I let out a string of profanities that nobody heard. And then I got my coffee to the office, and then I crutched back into the kitchen and cleaned up my mess of the trail of coffee that I had left. So that's how dedicated I am, friends. I was excited. I love getting up early. It makes me feel good to get up and do stuff. And in all honesty, it's been hard for me to record this podcast this week. I'm doing it, I guess, last minute, you could say. This is in real time because I'm recording Wednesday morning, and then I'll post tonight, Wednesday night Korean time, when I can edit when I get home. But it's been hard for me to do this podcast this morning just because my writing hasn't been going well this week. And this is the struggle. This is what I hoped would happen with this podcast, is it's keeping me accountable. So every week I have this sort of check-in. So I've been talking about what I'm working on, and now I have to show progress. And so looking back on this week and just knowing that it's been so busy with the hospital, and then my brother was here, and I haven't been writing as much as I should have, then I feel guilty about that, and then I try to put the podcast off, because the podcast is when I have to sit down and face the music and talk about what I'm working on. So let's get into it now. Let's talk about what I'm working on. It was 2 episodes ago, in episode 4, where I talked about Craig Johnson and the idea of building a fictional world based off of the world that you know, the world that you live in, which is what Craig Johnson did with his Longmire series. And I'm going to basically pick up where I left off there and tell you how I'm trying to do that. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week was episode 5. I hope you guys enjoyed meeting my brother. I had a lot of fun just talking books with him, just bullshitting, talking ideas. I'm really sad that I lost that first podcast we did together. We recorded a whole hour, and what was funny about it was he was really quizzing me. I sat down with my brother and turned the mics on, and I sort of imagined that I was going to start asking him questions. But what he did was he started quizzing me and asking me all these things about my book, and I selfishly just started rolling with it and telling him all these things, going into detail about my plans. And now that podcast is just lost to the world. We talked about that last episode, so I won't rehash the whole experience. But he was kind enough to sit down and do another episode with me, and that's just what you guys heard. That's just what we talk about, which is what's fun for me, which is why I love the idea of podcasting, is because the conversation that you heard last episode, that's just what me and my brother do. If we're alone at a table and there's no other distractions, and we have coffee or wine, or we're at lunch, doesn't matter what it is. That's just what happens when we're together, and that's fun, and it's comfortable for both of us. And so it's fun to be able to do that on the show. So I took a little bit of a break from the story that I've been telling since my brother was here, which makes sense and is symbolic of the fact that I've been sidetracked by my surgery and my stay at the hospital, and then my brother's visit, and now I'm ready to get back on track. We took my brother on Sunday. April and I took him to the hotel, this nice hotel in town where you can get a fancy bus limousine. I don't know why it's called a limousine. I guess because you get chauffeured. It is a nice bus, big seats, not a shitty little city bus like you imagine. We took him to the hotel and saw him off. We had last drinks together, played cards. That was fun. We waved goodbye to him on the bus. After he left, there was the most incredible dark orange, like burnt sky sunset. There were so many clouds in the sky, which you don't see a lot here. And the sunset was really dynamic. And April and I got home, and we were watching the sunset out our window. And it was just a very nostalgic feeling Sunday night. We had just said goodbye to a family member. We don't get to see much family these days living here. And so it's always special when we when we do have times like that. So we really felt we really felt his leaving after he was gone, and the sunset just set the whole thing off. And April was crying, and we were both feeling nostalgic. And that was a really good day to just feel that and appreciate him. And then as these things go, what happened next was he was gone. And then Monday morning came around, and it was my first day to go back to work after my surgery. And I got up Monday morning and did some writing, and it was back to the grind. Back to the grind. So here's what I've done this week. It's Wednesday now. What I try to do to get myself back on track is Monday and Tuesday. I tried really hard to reestablish my process of having a golden hour every morning. And I was able to do that Monday and Tuesday. I did it from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. And that's pretty good for me because usually April, she might be up, but she's usually doing her own thing at that time. So the household hasn't really started, the day hasn't really started. I can come into the office and shut myself in. The real pain in the ass is that it's just so uncomfortable for me to even sit down because of my legs. So being in a writing position is physically difficult, and that's a strange thing. I've never experienced that before. The most comfortable thing I can do is to lay down with my leg propped up. But how productive do you feel with a computer in your hands when you're on your back? That position. When you're on your back, you feel like you should be watching a movie, not at work and attentive and having your fingers flying across the keyboard and ideas flying off your mind. It just doesn't seem to compute. So it's even been a struggle just to sort of get in the office and get all set up and sit down and write. So that's why it was a victory. I'm all about small victories. With all the struggles that I've had with this writing thing, I've learned that when I set my goals too big and I get all excited about how I'm going to write a novel in 10 days or whatever the insane goal is that I set, that's just an easy recipe for failure because it soon gets too hard and it's easy to fail quicker. So I'm all about setting small goals and doable goals and daily little things that help me feel like I am achieving something and that it's that same feeling that you get when you make a list of to-do items, and then the first item you put on the list is something super easy like change the trash bags, and then you just do it real fast and you check that one off. That makes you feel good, and then gives you momentum going into the other list boxes that are harder to do, things that are going to take more effort or that you don't want to do. So I try to get momentum by having those small victories and daily. Daily is what you need. That's the real bitch of this writing craft, is that if you're not doing it daily, you just that's the only way to do it. It's the best analogy I've ever heard or seen is that writing is it's just like exercise and being healthy. It's not something you can just do 1 week and then take another week off and then do for 2 weeks and then take 3 weeks off. It doesn't work like that. It's all about your habits. It's what you're doing every day, and those things snowball over the long term, and that's really all that matters, is the little things that you do every day. So Monday and Tuesday, I got up, I had my magic hour. Monday, I wrote and brainstormed for only an hour. It was hard to get back into it, but I forced myself to do it. Tuesday, I got rolling a little bit more. I got excited about some of my ideas, and then I think I spent about 2 hours writing Tuesday morning. And now this morning, I'm using this time to podcast when I should be writing, and I don't like that. I don't like that the podcast distracts from the actual writing, but I think it is worth it if it holds me accountable. And what I'm going to be doing is talking about my ideas live on the show. So I'm going to actually use this time to work through what I'm going through with my story, as if I'm talking to a friend, which I am talking to you guys, talking to the listener who I know can give me feedback and can call me out. You guys can call me out on my bullshit, or you can encourage me when I have successes. And so I think that's good for me. So that's why I'm willing to do this. So Tomorrow City, I'm trying to write my first story in the Tomorrow City universe. And if you want to know about my motivation or how I thought about this world and creating this city, you can listen to episode 4 for all those details. But now the situation that I'm in is I have this world. It's vague, but I have some specifics. I know what my city looks like. I know who lives there. I know there are supernatural beings. I know this is going to be an urban fantasy. And I'm trying to take the general ideas of this world and this city and grind it all down in specifics and think, okay, what's the best story I can tell? Which protagonist is the best protagonist to tell the story of Tomorrow City? And what I'm trying to do is find a powerful, small story that I can tell in this universe to introduce it to the reader. So my idea for now is that I have decided on who my protagonist is, and I have decided vaguely on their story. And what's going to happen is I've decided that my protagonist is a foreigner. So this is going to be a guy who comes from America, and he's coming to Tomorrow City for the first time. And I like that perspective of the traveler and the foreigner. One, because it is easy to relate to in my own experience of a American coming to a Korean city, and then two, because I think it's a good, maybe hopefully it'll be an effective device for introducing readers to the world, because I really like this idea of this Tomorrow City world that I have. And just like Craig Johnson and his Longmire universe, I hope that I can write a lot of stories in this world. So one way that I've changed from my epic fantasy ideas is that I'm not just trying to write some big knock it out of the park trilogy and then be finished. I just want to write lots of stories in this universe, hopefully fun stories with different characters and from different angles of the city. So I've been trying to decide where to start, who to do that with, and I have different ideas for characters that I like. But for this first one, since it'll be everybody, even including my first time to experience Tomorrow City, I felt like it would be a good device to have a foreigner who's coming here for the first time. So everything will be strange for the reader, and the reader will need things explained to them about how this city works. And so it seems to make sense that my protagonist will also be an outsider who's seeing everything for the first time. Kind of like when you're with Harry Potter in the first Harry Potter book or movie, you're experiencing all of these strange wizarding. You're experiencing the wizarding world through Harry Potter's eyes. So that's the same idea that I'm thinking about. I think it's an effective device, especially for a fantasy series, is that Harry Potter has never seen dishes flying around the kitchen or owls bringing letters or kids riding around on brooms before. And so when he sees it for the first time, he's surprised. It blows his mind. He makes mistakes because he's a muggle. And that's the same experiences that the reader is having when we see it. We don't know what's going on. And so we have to learn how Hogwarts works at the same time that Harry's learning. So when Harry is walking around in Hogwarts for the first time and the staircases are changing and the faces in the picture frames are winking at him, that's all strange for him, just like it's strange for us. And I think that was a good decision by JK Rowling. Rather than starting the story later when Harry Potter's already there and eventually things are normal for him. and he is comfortable in the wizard world. So she could have started there, or she could have started with a different character like Hermione or Ron or any other wizard who already knows how these things work. But I think it was a good way to introduce us into the world by having us follow along with Harry, who is a muggle, or who thought he was a muggle. He's a muggle for all intents and muggle purposes. So I like that idea. That's what I want to do. I know who my character is. I know that my first scene, I'm going to have this character coming into the airport, and he's flying into Korea, and he's trying to get to Tomorrow City, and he's going to get detained at customs, and that's where the first conflict is, and he first starts to realize there are strange things afoot in Tomorrow City. I'll get into more detail on that in a minute. So let me tell you how I've been thinking about this process. It's strange for me to to explain my writing process because I feel like it's so inefficient. I'm not a writer. I am a writer, but I'm not a published author yet. And so it's funny for me to broadcast these things because I'm obviously not coming from an area of expertise, but in a, what would you say? In a counterintuitive way, I think that's important and actually valuable because you can get the perspective of somebody who's in it, not somebody who's accomplished. And I feel like I would have liked to listen to a show like this when I was trying to write for the first time, or even now. And actually there was one, and it was called The Story Grid. The Story Grid was this podcast that was started between these two guys, Shawn, who is a famous editor, totally top of the chain experience. He was a traditional editor for a long time, and he has all the experience in the world with New York publishing houses and worked with big time authors, big time novels. And then this younger guy named Tim, I'm sorry, I can't remember his last name right now. Tim, he's trying to write a lit RPG novel. And so it was this inexperienced, the first time writer working with a badass editor, and they went through the whole process of this guy Tim writing his first novel, and it was brutal. It was exactly what my experience is, which he just had a lot of trouble. He would write a lot. The editor would break it down. He would get discouraged, and they would podcast every week. It was called The Story Grid, if you want to look it up. I'm not sure if they're still posting, but they did episodes for a couple of years while Tim worked on this novel. And that was really good for me. That was actually one of the best shows that I've listened to just because it was so honest and in the moment. So anyways, that's why I think I have some ground to stand on here, because all I'm doing is just trying to be honest about the struggles that I'm having. And I like going through the process and taking you guys through it with me, for better or for worse, you know? And that's what I'm trying to do here, is figure out what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. So on Saturday, I had a good morning. I actually had, I've said this week has been really busy. And Saturday, I actually got a lot of alone time because April, my wife and my brother went to Seoul. So he finally got to go do something fun. I didn't go with him because I would have just slowed him down. So what that meant was I had most of the day Saturday to myself. And that was a really good time for me to gather my thoughts, and I got all my shit together in my bag, and I got out of the house and crutched to the coffee shop, and I had quite a few hours to think about my story and start to try and get back on track. So one thing I like to do a lot is I'll listen to a couple short podcasts and take notes, and those really get my brain into the writing space. The other best thing to do is just to read. So before I write, I'll always just pick up one. It doesn't even matter what book it is. Just read one chapter, and I find that slows my brain down into writing mode. I can't be on my phone or doing things around the house. I need to get into the space of fiction and the speed. So it's something about the speed of thoughts and the depth of thoughts that happens to my mind when I'm reading, which is the same frequency that I need to get on for writing. So reading is a great way to do that. But when I'm brainstorming for my novel, one thing that I really like to do is listen to a short podcast. And a couple of my favorites are Writing Excuses with Brandon Sanderson and a few other authors. And then another one is, my other favorite writing podcast is by a woman named K.M. Weiland. And her podcast is called Helping Writers Become Authors. And she's done a lot in the self-publishing space. She has nonfiction books, how-to books about writing and the writing process. And I love her show. It's just no bullshit. She just has a script prepared. She has ideas prepared for whatever her advice is for the day, and then she just gets into it. And it's only, 15 to 20 minutes long. It's perfect. So when I listen to her on Saturday, I always listen to her and just take notes. And inevitably what she says will trigger thoughts about my own story, and then that'll set me off into, my own brainstorming. So I was listening to her on Saturday, and the title of the episode was 5 ways to earn your audience's loyalty. And the one that stuck out to me most was number 1 on her list, which she said is setup and payoff. And she called this earning the feels. And she said that foreshadowing is the writer's greatest magic trick. She didn't exactly say that. That's me paraphrasing. But she said that, payoffs make us feel like the story works, like we're going somewhere, like the author's in control. And that really hit me as powerful. Setups and payoffs. It made me think about my favorite fantasy series, Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. That is what's so satisfying about his story, is that I feel like I'm always being set up, and that those setups will always pay off. And his stories have a slow pacing, and you don't know exactly what's going to get paid off in any particular scene or chapter, but you know that if there was some sort of drug or chemical mentioned a couple chapters ago, at some point we're going to have some fun event where that drug and chemical becomes pivotal to the story, and our hero has to use it, or he uses it in a clever way. And there's all these little mysteries. I think that's what really hooks me so much about Name of the Wind, is there's a million little mysteries. And what he does is the author pays those off. He doesn't do it all at once, but he does it slowly over time. And so after it only takes a couple setups and payoffs for the reader to feel like, wow, this author is really leading me on a journey, and now I trust this author because they've already shown me that they can plant these seeds and then use them in an interesting way later on down the line. And once you do that, it's like, man, the reader is just hooked because they have trust in you. They can put down their guard and just read your story. And that struck me as really, really powerful, that setups and payoffs, that's really what the writer is doing. Foreshadowing. I mean, that's really the difference between a skilled author and somebody who just sits down off the top of their head and says, today I went to the grocery store and I bought apples and plums, and I went and bought gas after that, and then I went to work, and then I came home. Someone who's just rambling on with the story like that, there's no, well, that's not actually a story because there's no conflict, but there's no design to it. There's no setups and payoffs. I'm not confident that what they're telling me about at the grocery store or when they're at work, I'm not confident that that's going to be important later on. I feel like, they're just rambling, and so who cares? And I've read a lot of novels like that where I'm reading a scene and I just think, who cares? Because it doesn't feel like it's designed. It feels like the author is just writing And I think that's what sets some really great, especially fantasy novels, apart, is that author's ability to be in control. I read American Gods by Neil Gaiman recently, and it wasn't I didn't love it. I know it's really important. I know it's important in the urban fantasy canon, and that's why I read it. But I felt like American Gods suffered from a protagonist who wasn't in control. What the fuck is his name? Shadow is the name of the main character in American Gods. I felt like a lot of things were just happening to Shadow, and that he did have certain things that he wanted, but he wasn't driving the story. He was just sort of caught up in this whirlwind of wars going on around him and people who are more powerful than him, gods, literally gods, having their own quarrels, and Shadow getting sort of bounced around. And because of that, I felt like the narrative of the story really sagged, because our hero wasn't a very active hero. Towards the end, he had a little more agency. But my point is, what was really amazing about the novel is that by the time it gets to the end, like in the middle of the story, I was just like, I just wasn't really that interested. And I knew I was going to finish it, because I don't like not finishing a book. But I didn't care very much, and it took me a long time to read American Gods because of that. But then by the time I got to the end, Neil Gaiman, he started paying off a lot of these mysteries and clues that had happened in the first couple chapters. And that was a fun feeling. The end is really fun because you start to realize how many of these things were by design, and you start to get led into the mysteries, and then you have all these aha moments, like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. Oh, that's who that character was, and that's why he said that. And then it starts to get really fun. But that doesn't really happen until the end. And I think what was happening with my doubt as I read that novel was I wasn't sure that he was going to pay these things off, and I didn't really trust that the novel would deliver. And now that I've read it, now I know it does, and that goes a long way towards making me want to read more and more Neil Gaiman. But that was the magic of those setups and payoffs. By the time I finished it, it took even a story that I wasn't in love with. After I finished it, I just had a great deal of respect for Neil Gaiman, because the way he surprised me with, it's not that it's just 180 degree flip you on your head ending, but it is really clever, and you find out that he has had a plan the whole time, and it's all by design, and that's what you want with the story. So that was my biggest takeaway from K.M. Weiland. It made a lot of sense to me that really what you're doing as an author is you're foreshadowing, and then you're paying that stuff off later on. It's that old rule that people always quote about Chekhov's gun, that if there's a gun hanging on the wall in the first act, then it better get fired in the third act, whatever. And then the other thing, so I wrote two big notes in my notebook on Saturday. One was that idea about setups and payoffs, and the other one was know your ending. And I wrote, the end is in the beginning, it all aligns, this is the true power of story. That thread, what did I say? Oh, that thread is where theme comes from. So the thread that runs from the beginning to the ending, and the way that thread winds through the plot narrative, that's what your theme is. And she said something like that the end is always in the beginning. And I talked on previous episodes how I found out the hard way that the most powerful thing I can do before I write a story is really know the ending. And I thought it was just like, oh, if you know the end, it's easier to write the story, which is true. But now I'm realizing more the why. And the why is that if you know the end before you start the beginning, then you can do all of that foreshadowing. You can have those setups because you know you're going to pay them off. So it makes the whole thing more cohesive. And, a lot of what happens from the first draft to later drafts is that in the beginning, you don't really know exactly where you're going. And so, that first draft's always going to be more amorphous and vague. And then what you do in every draft after that is you hone everything down so that every scene has a place and a purpose, and it's all leading toward the climactic ending. So I'm going to have to go soon. I've got to get to the hospital, but I'm feeling inspired now. I'm feeling pumped up about my story, and I'm going to leave with this challenge for myself. I'm going to say this on the podcast so that I'm accountable to it. What I am doing now is I have my idea for my character, and I know the first scene of that character coming into Tomorrow City in the airport, and he's going to get caught up in this special kind of customs, and the custom agents are going to tell him that he's a werewolf. And my main character, he's going to say, like any normal person would say, he's going to laugh and say, "What the fuck are you talking about? I'm not a werewolf. Werewolves aren't real." And the customs officials are going to say, "Why are you lying to us? It's obvious. We did the test. We ran the screening. You're a werewolf." And they're going to show him, they're going to give him the information, because apparently this is a normal thing that supernatural beings live in Tomorrow City. And so my main character is just going to be he doesn't know what the hell's going on. And they're going to tell him, "Okay, here's how you can live appropriately in Tomorrow City, and we need you to come to these meetings once a week to meet with other supernaturals so that you can know what the rules are and how to conduct yourself, and we're going to have somebody show you around." So he's going to have no idea what's going on, and that's going to be the thing that sets off the story. And because I like that beginning, now what I'm trying to think of is, okay, what is the best beginning, or what is the best ending? So it just makes common sense to me that if your beginning is the main character getting this mysterious and strange news that he's a werewolf, then the natural ending to that story is going to be the answer to that question. So I think this will be the first story that I write in Tomorrow City, and it'll introduce readers to Tomorrow City and what life is like there. And so I'm trying to come up with the best ending, which I believe the ending, it has to be, if that's my beginning, the ending has to be the answer to those. Well, there's two mysteries. First of all, is he really a werewolf or not? Are they wrong, or is he wrong? And then the second mystery is, if he is or is not a werewolf, why did they think that? Why did they think he was and he didn't think he was? So there's the mystery of the confusion, who's wrong, and then there's the mystery of the obvious one, which is he really a werewolf or not, and do werewolves really live in Tomorrow City? So that's the first story that I'm trying to tell. I've been brainstorming a lot with different ideas, and as soon as I can, I need to get to the point where I can just write. And what I've found in past experience is that I can't always find those answers. One of the best ways for me to find those answers is to actually write. So I need to sit down and write that scene of the airport customs scene, and it's not going to be great. It's not going to have all the clarity of focus, but in writing it, I'm going to find what I love about it, and it's going to set my brain off thinking, and I'm going to be able to I think this happened with my Jamie Ray Demon Hunter story, is that I think I wrote 2 or 3 beginnings. Maybe they were 5,000 or even 10,000 words each. A few chapters, maybe the first 4 chapters of the book. I did it one time, I didn't like it. That took 3 or 4 days. I did it another time, another 3 or 4 days, I didn't like it. And I think it was my 3rd or 4th beginning that I had written. I felt like, oh yeah, and each time it got a little better. And then I was able to jump off into the story. So that's what I need to do with this one to really get this Tomorrow City world rolling. And so my promise to you guys is that over this next week, I will actually write those beginnings, and I'll let you know what progress I made, and I'll let you know next week if I'm any closer to some clarity of what my first story will be like. So that's it. I'm putting that out there, putting myself on the line. I'll have to keep protecting my golden hour as the week goes on to try and make it happen. But for now, I've got to run, unfortunately. Life calls, regular life calls, errands call, all that boring stuff. And then I will be back before you know it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is fun. Please send. I've got some great reviews and comments lately, and I love getting those from you guys. So tell me what you think. If you think I'm full of shit, if you think you know what I'm dealing with, if you've dealt with the same things, and whatever your thoughts are. It really makes me feel good to share, and it's fun when other people can share and give me their feedback too. Happy Wednesday to everyone out there. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week.